costs that have been forcing so many families to choose between food on the table or gas on the tank, or between a warm house at night or college fund for their kids, will now stabilize those costs and go down over time. And that's because, in addition to all these things, this law has been custom built to lower costs for consumers, to make it more affordable for them to switch to clean energy, while at the same time it faces up to the storm of climate disasters that are plaguing our nation. One need not look any further than what's occurring with water right now in Jackson, Mississippi, to understand why this law is so necessary and comes at the most urgent moment. There's a huge amount here to celebrate. And with the passage of this law, attention now turns to the ever most important thing, which is implementation. And that's where Director Young and others across the administration are firmly focused. As head of the Office of Management and Budget, Director Young is tasked with overseeing the implementation of the president's vision across the executive branch. She will be at the heart of ensuring that the Inflation Reduction Act brings benefit and support to households across America. So, Director Young, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for your work and commitment in executing the president's vision. And I want to start, if I can, to ask you a direct question about the broadness of that vision. I want you, if you could, Director Young, to help us all appreciate just how this bill meets the president's directive to grow an economy and expand opportunity for all Americans. And as you do that, I hope you don't mind, Director, if I ask you to reflect on what you think the value of this bill is for folks who come from your hometown of Clinton, Louisiana.
Thank you so much, Patrick. One, thank you for having me here. It's a great honor for me to be with you. And so thank you before we get into it. Also, you laid out everything beautifully. I can go home and pack up. If you listen to Patrick, you heard about the historic levels of funding, clean energy, almost $370 billion. I've been in this town a couple of decades working on federal budget from the Hill side, from the executive branch side. And let me tell you, this does not happen every year. This does not happen every decade. So when people speak of historic terms, it's because we've been around a long time, and to see this come to fruition. Prescription drugs on its own, you've heard people, just like you heard people talk about Infrastructure Week year after year after year and saw nothing happen. To have real people in this country actually win over special interests, and that we can finally have HHS negotiate drug prices for our senior citizens, which will hopefully then trickle out into the rest of society, is a huge win. You hear about the prices people pay for drugs in this country, and it is unbelievable. I have a grandmother who will be 94 years old, if God says the same, in 2 weeks, Patrick, and she is an insulin user. She, as you can imagine, with anyone over 90 uses prescription drugs. This is a game changer for our family, and I hope people realize the gravity of what seniors who are on a fixed income have to deal with when they see prescription drug prices rise and rise and rise while their take home doesn't do the same. So I think this is a game changer. And being from Clinton, Louisiana, people are like, why are you complaining about the heat in this town? You're from South Louisiana. We stay in the house in their air conditioning, and these are window units, highly inefficient. So I look forward to going back to my hometown of less than 2,000 people and encouraging people to utilize these energy efficiency tax credits and programs that will be managed by the states so they can save. We estimate that families will save about $500 on average a year from energy savings alone. So this is a game changer for American families. You talk about bringing down costs, this bill will do it.
That is, as our president would say, it's a BFD. I think, Director Young, that you, of course, already have done a fantastic job here of making some of these issues accessible to our listeners. But I want you, if you could, to just help us better situate the historic nature of something as simple as Medicare being given the ability to negotiate lower drug prices. Sometimes, in order for people to appreciate an achievement, They have to understand what obstacles have existed in the past. Why has it been so incredibly difficult to accomplish this and to get at this moment? What has stood in the way of that over these many years, many decades?
Well, one, Patrick, let me take a step back and remind us, we talked about the prescription drug negotiation piece, which is huge, but this bill will also cap out-of-pocket expenses for seniors on Medicare. You hear horror stories of people who pay $30, $40, $50, $60,000 for life-saving drugs. Something is wrong with that. And this bill will cap out-of-pocket expenses at $2,000 for seniors over the next couple of years. That's a big win. Outside of even the drug savings we're going to achieve with negotiations. We'll also make sure vaccines are covered for seniors, and we'll make sure insulin costs for seniors are capped by month. So there are other benefits in addition to negotiation. Look, again, I worked on Capitol Hill for many years. As the president likes to say, I'm a capitalist. I don't, demagogue, but clearly there was a concerted effort to ensure that negotiation did not happen. It would bring down profits for some, but this is the right thing to do for the American people, and the president overcame those obstacles that have been around for decades and ensured that American seniors will now be able to have a little breathing room, as the president likes to say. You know, he likes, when I met him, he continues to say this, and he believes it. It is a core value for Joe Biden when he talks about budgets and economy. Trickle down didn't work. The only way to grow a fair and equitable economy in this world is in this country is from the bottom up and the middle out. And when you talk about giving senior space, when you talk about giving Americans just a little breathing room so they can do for themselves, this prescription drug benefit is exactly what he's talking about.
So Director Young, I'm excited about this conversation, not only because of the breadth of your knowledge and experience, but your ability to connect technical issues with our values. When you just said very simply just now that something's wrong with that, that's what people experience every day at their kitchen tables as they're sitting and trying to set their finances, and they look at the tough choices that they're faced with, that their parents are faced with, that their young people who are just getting out of college are faced with, and they say something is wrong with that. I wish somebody would solve it. And you and others in this administration and the president just solved a whole heck of a lot in one fell swoop. But as you do that, we all have to be concerned with the project of implementation, where the rubber meets the road, is a unique challenge that I think your CV suggests that you are uniquely prepared for. So I want you to talk just a bit here on the technical side of the challenge of coordination. Most folks get overwhelmed by the avalanche of acronyms that we use on Capitol Hill. But these investments in IRA are much bigger than the sum of their parts. There are programs in EPA, DOT, GSA to collaborate on federal support for the purchase of low carbon construction materials. There's funding for CEQ and at least 7 other agencies to work on improving federal permitting. There are new clean energy tax credits that will require collaboration between Treasury and other agencies. Please give us your sense as somebody who's deeply steeped in the interagency work and the Byzantine processes of our administrative bureaucracy. You're sitting in the center. Can you share a little bit with us about what it takes to make sure that all of this works in a collaborative way, in the ways intended?
So, Patrick, we talked a little about the need for plain language around, some of these things, and my agency is anything but that. I went to college. I grew up in a small town. No one taught you what the Office of Management and Budget was. I got to this town, and you kind of learn what these small centers of power can do for everyday people. OMB is absolutely one of the prime examples of a tiny little engine that no one heard of. And OMB, I like to call the nerve center of the federal government. We sit in the executive office of the president, but we have the largest the largest civilian staff, non-political staff. So we take the ideals of administrations of presidents, their values, and ensure that agencies, the large bureaucracy, is implementing programs in the way that the president envisions. So I like to tell people to simplify things. I'm the budget director for the president. I get to put his budget together. But that's a simplified way of talking about it. OMB also sets federal government policy through management guidance. So we will often send out, for example, to contract officers, these are the things we want you to do in these contract documents. We procure almost $700 billion a year in this government, and it matters who we're procuring with and what we're asking our contractors to do. That's one small example through just our procurement system that we can impact how government works for regular folks. So this office is uniquely situated to ensure that the promises Joe Biden has kept and will continue to keep, that we see those just individual small decisions made at agencies, that those are reflective of everything he's told the American people he will accomplish for them.
It's pretty clear that we're all fortunate that we have you as the quarterback for that team in this complicated moment of implementation. I want, if I can, Director Young, to go back to something that you noted that President Biden said yesterday, and that he often says, where he says very clearly, I am someone who believes in capitalism, but we have to figure out how it works for all Americans. In recent decades, economic growth and opportunity has been, let's face it, unevenly distributed. It's something that we have seen really accelerate over the last few decades, and regrettably, despite the essentiality of critical frontline workers that's all been revealed through COVID, regrettably, those disparities grew as a consequence of the pandemic. What opportunities does the Inflation Reduction Act give us to reverse those trends, to ensure that no community is left behind? And if you could, Director, I've heard you speak so eloquently on what it's going to take to make sure that women and people of color and non-educated, non-college educated workers aren't left behind in the need to move towards a more broadly shared prosperity in our country. Can you give us a sense of how you think IRA reverses these trends, and specifically the things that center some of the most vulnerable workers that you have just been such an eloquent champion of?
So, I like to point out to people, we're doing not just on the investment side, which is critically important, but we're also bringing fairness to the tax code in this country. 55 of the most profitable corporations in this country paid $0 in taxes. Nurses, firefighters, government workers, civil servants, those on the front line during COVID, they paid their fair share. But we find that the wealthiest in this country, the most profitable corporations, have found legal loopholes, ways to ensure they're not taxed like regular people in this country. That stops with IRA. We will ensure there's a 15% minimum tax on the wealthiest corporations in this country. So that allows us not only to have a fairer tax code, which is just the right thing to do, but it allows us to invest in the American people. So all the clean energy investments we've been talking about, we haven't talked a lot about, but let's not forget we're bringing down healthcare costs for people on the Affordable Care Act, making sure they save on average $800 a year. All of those investments we're paying for. So we pay for our investments. That is a core tenet of Joe Biden's budget. You see it reflected in the IRA. And on top of that, we're bringing down the deficit. We do that through a fair tax code. And that goes right back to the value of bottom up, middle out. Make sure what we're doing in this country is equitable, and we're not asking anyone to do any more than anyone else. You just got to do your fair share.
The if I could, because you are the OMB director and you just touched on the actual act of deficit reduction in the Inflation Reduction Act, could I get you, Director Young, to just step back a second, widen the aperture here, and give us your sense of how this affects the overall fiscal health of the nation, what your assessment is of the fiscal health of the nation. We've got some new statistics recently on workforce participation in America. You know better than most that there continues to be a tremendous amount of anxiety being carried by companies and individual workers. And I wonder how you assess the health of the economy and how you think IRA contributes to our direction of travel overall.
So we are on track to reduce the deficit by over $1.7 trillion, Patrick, this year, this fiscal year. You know,
can you say
again,
that number? Can you say that number one more time?
$1.7 trillion. You know, lots of people. That's one of those things like infrastructure, like prescription drugs. People have talked about it, but they haven't done it. And this president has done it by ensuring that we have a healthy enough economy where we're raising more revenues because people are back to work and the engine of the economy is back coming out of the pandemic. We clearly have more work to do, but I remind people, we saw a lot on the news about gas prices rising. What you don't see in the news is gas prices going down. People don't like to cover that, but we're down $1.30 since the peak of the summer. So we're on the right track in a lot of places, and where we aren't, where we need to bring down costs, this is exactly why we need IRA. We need to bring down people's healthcare costs. This bill is going to do it. We need to make sure that when people get their monthly energy bill, that they can utilize these tax credits and weatherization programs to shrink down their energy costs. This is the bill to continue to help bring down kitchen table costs for American families.
Fantastic, and congratulations on that whopping 1.7 trillion. It's a big deal.
It's not bad.
It's really quite extraordinary. I wonder if I could get you, Director Young, just to bring, you just mentioned what's in the headlines and what's not in the headlines. There's something that's in the headlines right now that this bill, I think, directly addresses. This plus other initiatives that your office has been engaged in, and primarily that's for me, Justice 40 and the need to infuse equity across government interventions. We're all seeing the headlines out of Jackson. We're all troubled by the perfect storm here of climate challenges and lack of investment over time in infrastructure. And regrettably, we see these instances play out in communities that can least afford these disasters, that are least responsible for climate change, but that bear the brunt of it. I wonder if you could help our audience understand the Justice 40 initiative, the set of, I think, roughly $60 billion in programs for investing in environmental justice that are in IRA, and how you think that can mitigate the kinds of things that we're seeing coming out of Jackson.
Look, I think IRA, you pointed out some of the environmental justice money that's in that bill, but also don't forget we had a historic infrastructure law passed, and on top of that, we had the American Rescue Plan. So you have to take the sum of all the parts. We are going to get rid of lead pipes that disproportionately affect children of color, and we see through research that follows them for the rest of their lives. And something has to be done about that, and now we have the resource to do something about it. IRA, again, not just to be taken in a vacuum. The two budgets we put out for Joe Biden have insisted that we put equity into everything we do, and the environmental justice programs are just one piece of that. Look, I come from probably, a place not very different from Jackson. The hole we found ourselves in was not done in 1 year, certainly not 1 decade, over several decades. It's going to take time to see these resources build infrastructure back in this country. The president likes to talk about Loudness County. down in Alabama, not Jackson, but right next door. It was just a natural life, everyday life that sewer fed into people's backyards. No infrastructure whatsoever, not dilapidated, just none, ever there in that community of color. And he asked about that community. His EPA administrator has been down to there. His infrastructure coordinator, Mitch Landrieu, has been there because this president cares about those historically left behind. I think he calls them fence line communities. A lot of these communities also were bustling communities, and federal government and state decisions about where you put highways made an impact disproportionately, bringing down some of those thriving communities. And we have finally the resources in place, and I think the team in place, a cabinet who is committed to the president's values of making sure that nobody's left behind. This isn't to take anything from anyone, Patrick. This is to grow the pie so that everybody in this country gets to live, for some, an elusive dream. But we think if the least amongst us does well, everyone does better in this country. And Joe Biden's budget, including the IRA, is a reflection of that just core tenet value that he carries.
Thank you. You carry that story so impressively well. Director Young, I was going to ask you a question now about pay-fors and tax fairness and all the concern that we see being expressed about how resources in the past in the IRS have been targeting the working poor in America instead of the richest folk. But I think there's a lot about that out there. But the way you just responded to this question and your raising of Lowndes County, which for too many Americans is kind of frozen in time, but the civil rights movement, and they don't understand the ongoing challenges there. It compels me to end our discussion on a more personal note. I'm enamored with your history, the journey that you've taken from Louisiana to magnet programs to your academic achievements, but your professional achievements that bring you to this historic moment in the country. And as you look at this extraordinary bill that was just passed, if you look at all the new institutions that are being created as a consequence of these investments in chips, the Science Act, infrastructure, I wonder, as you think about the major work of managing the bureaucracy of our democracy into the future, if there's any advice that you would offer to young people, young academics, young activists who are watching this conversation with you right now, who are considering a career in public service. What do you think this moment means for them in the contribution that they want to make and the opportunities that are available for them to be their best selves for this greatest country on earth?
So one, I started the government in something called the Presidential Management Fellow Program, and I just had a chance to speak to some of the graduates from this year's graduating class. And our hope is that they use this fellowship as an opportunity to stay in the government and become leaders in the government. And one thing I hope I left with them, and I hope I leave with people here, is government service. You hear all the bills, the laws you just laid out. None of it works without committed, dedicated federal workers. That is why you have a president who is a workers' president. That includes federal workers. We want to have positive policies here to ensure that we attract the best and brightest. It is clear we have around the corner federal workers who can retire in droves. We want to keep them in, keep that experience. And really, OMB, I talked about the Nerve Center. One of the things we do is, with our colleagues at the Office of Personnel Management, is ensure that the workforce has everything they need to do all of this implementation with us. We can put out the values and goals, but that one contracting officer who makes a critical decision can really decide whether or not we bring back a manufacturing base through issuing a contract. So it's important to us, it's important to the president to make sure we have policies in place that foster a great working environment and we keep the best and brightest in the federal government. So there are no small decisions around here, because everything is interrelated, from how we treat our workers to who we attract and retain. And in turn, those are the same people who get to implement all these important things and make decisions for people. And it's important to me at OMB that our staff can see that those discrete decisions, what that means to people like my 94-year-old grandmother. These things aren't made in a vacuum. We can discuss them on the edges, but we have to bring all these decisions back to regular people. What does it do? What do our decisions do? And it's important to me also to bring back normalcy and norms. Our inspectors generals are going to be important partners. That's another thing we do from OMB. We partner with our IG community. Joe Biden loves an inspector general. They keep us honest. And we encourage all our agencies, go talk to them, especially if you got funding in one of these historic bills. Talk to your IGs early. That makes sure we do a better job of implementation. And if we treat them like partners, that will make sure all of our jobs are done better. We're about transparency here in this administration. And that's another core value of Joe Biden. And that means we're trying to do things well. We won't get it all right, but if we do things like we're supposed to, and we partner with our oversight partners, it's more likely than not we will be successful.
Director Young, we're all indebted to you for your public service and your diligence and commitment, particularly in helping to arrive at this historic achievement of IRA. Thank you so very much for joining us today. And we're going to wish an early happy birthday to your grandmother, who's 94 years young. Thank you so much, Director.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry I sound like this. I also have a 10-and-a-half-month-old, and she gives me a cold about every 3 weeks on. I can set my watch by it. So thank you for having me, and I'm glad you don't have to share a room with me, because I again have a daycare cold, I like to call them.
They are little human petri dishes, but we love them.
We do love them.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. It is so great to have a working mom who's leading OMB and doing this work. So we thank you.
You know why I can do it? Because Joe Biden also is a family man.
That's right.
That's why I can do it.
Amen to that. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. I'm now going to turn the conversation over to our Executive Vice President for Communications and Strategy at CAP, my friend Daniela Gibbs-Legere, who's going to lead us in a conversation with folks from all across the country who know firsthand what the promise is of the IRA. So thank you, Daniela. Over to you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to Director Young for laying out so clearly how we turn these commitments into action going forward. And I think there's no better way to follow up that conversation than by speaking to some of the very folks who will be most impacted by this legislation. As both Patrick and Director Young made clear, the Inflation Reduction Act is a law that will touch every corner of this country. It's going to bring financial relief to folks at a time when they need it most. And it's going to invest in climate action in a way that will transform households across this country. These aren't esoteric changes. They're investments that folks will see and feel in their everyday lives, in their homes, when they look at their utility bills, or when they collect their prescriptions. This is a law that'll make a huge difference. And I am so thrilled to welcome 4 Americans from across the country who can speak to the direct impact of these changes and what this all means to them. So please join me in welcoming our panelists now. Kathy Salisbury is a Phoenix, Arizona resident who lives with MS and has faced significant prescription drug costs since 2020 when COVID worsened her health challenges. Robin Craycroft resides in Springfield, Missouri, and has latent autoimmune diabetes. She is on Medicare and has gone to extreme lengths to afford her insulin. Mario Belonga is a small business owner who runs Mario's Westside Market in a food desert in West Las Vegas. The pandemic closed countless small businesses around him while large corporations thrived. And Pat Devaney is a Champaign, Illinois resident who was elected Secretary Treasurer of the Illinois AFL-CIO chapter in 2019. He is a former firefighter and understands how the Inflation Reduction Act's investments in forest conservation and resilience will help to prevent deadly wildfires. So Kathy, Robin, Mario, Pat, thank you all for joining us and taking the time. And Kathy, let me start with you.
Yeah.
For our
Okay.
viewers now, our listeners, can you just give us a little bit about your story? Tell us about yourselves.
Hi, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. It's early here. It's only 11:30 here in Phoenix, Arizona. So thank you so much for allowing me to share a story. My name is, as I said, Kathy, and I am of 3 adult children. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and my MS symptoms started at the age of 40. I started having symptoms and I was going to the doctor and I was in so much pain and needed medication. It caused me not to be able to work. And so it took many years of trying to get a diagnosis. And at the time, I was on my own personal medical plan. But then in 2014, I became displaced and I was on disability. And at that time, Medicare was given to me because I was no longer able to work. And I want to add that Medicare isn't always for the 65 and older. It is for those who are disabled and cannot work and have that disability that is preventing them. And so for me, it caused me to be displaced. So for 2 years, I lived with family. Until I could get myself together for my children. I mean, if you think about it, I had a choice of, am I well for myself or do I have a roof over my head? And those are things that really should not be a question in your daily life, you know? If you're not well enough to work, then what do you do? And so I'm thankful for Medicare. However, the cost of my medications and the symptoms was very debilitating. I was diagnosed with remitting and relapsing MS. And what that does is there are moments where you are fine, when you're in a remission. And so the medication is not exactly as, you don't have to take it as much as you would when you're in a relapse. But I was in a relapse for quite a while. And so it really did create an expense that was unbelievable. Just for my MS medication on Medicare was over $300 a month. And that's just for one medication. When you're on a fixed income, just that one, and I had 5 different medications that I took, it was difficult for me. And then 2020 came along, and there goes COVID. I got COVID 2 times and developed more symptoms. I'm thankful to still be alive. However, I did lose a sister to COVID, and COVID does create other things that will exasperate what you have. And so it did create more of a health problem for me. My diabetes. I never had diabetes before. Then I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 2021. And so from there, I started, taking a medication, which was Tradenta. It was the best medication that my doctor recommended for me, and able to, take care of my diabetes, get it under control. So that medication started off at $46 a month, which was doable at that time. It jumped into being $46 a month to $146 a month. And you look at that, plus the MS medication, I just couldn't afford it. They put me on a less effective medication for my type 2 diabetes. And that created other problems, because then I had the side effects. And I fell into the donut hole of Medicare, which means that you're paying more. So some of those prescriptions went up even higher. So I was really thankful that my doctor gave me samples. He gave me samples of medication that I needed just to get me through to the next year so that it would roll into, okay, now you're starting over, you're not in the donut, your medication would go down. And I didn't know about that donut hole effect. And I'm sure a lot of people don't know either. And so I'm really excited that this Reduction Act has happened. It's going to mean so much for me and my family personally. I'd like to own a home again. I'm thankful that I'm living in, I have my own place, but it's nothing like home ownership. That's one of the American dreams, to be able to afford that. And so not only that, just to be able to save, and, I am a little ways from 65, so I got to think about that too. So I'm really excited that this is going to give me the opportunity to save some money, to have a more quality of life that I'm looking for. So I'm very thankful to President Biden and everyone who has passed this act. And I've spread the news to family members and friends of mine who I know that are on Medicare that also pay a lot of money. And they're like, tell me about it. I'm so excited. So I'm really, really glad, and I'm pleased, and I'm spreading the word. I just want you to know. And so thank you again for having me.
Well, thank
Thank
you.
you so
And
much.
and you answered my question, which was going to be, about the Inflation Reduction Act and how it finally allows Medicare to negotiate for lower drug prices. And there's also an annual cap on out-of-pocket costs at $2,000. So I was going to ask you, how will these provisions help you? But it sounds like it's going to help you save money. It's going to
Yes,
stop you from needing to get sample medications from your doctor and
yes,
falling into a donut hole, and
yes,
making those difficult choices.
yes, yes. And I'm thankful my doctor was able to get it. I had to wait a little bit, but now I have the ability to pay for it, knowing that that $2,000 cap is going to save me thousands of dollars every year.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kathy. I want to turn to
Thank
Robin.
you.
You're welcome. Robin, if you could, talk to us briefly about your story. Oh, Robin, I believe you're still on mute. It's okay. It happens to all of us still.
I'm sorry. My name is Robin Craycroft, and I am a mental health therapist here in town. I live here with my husband of 25 years, and we're actually grew up in Southern California and moved to Missouri when my husband became disabled. About 5 years ago, my health started declining daily. I was losing a lot of weight. I couldn't eat, and each day I became weaker and weaker. I consider myself pretty tough, but I finally had to give in and allow my husband to take me to the ER when I couldn't stand. I soon learned through the doctors that I was a type 1 diabetic, that an autoimmune had attacked my pancreas and destroyed it. So I was going to need insulin to survive for the rest of my life. Doctor told me that my life was going to change forever, but I was lucky to be alive. At that time, I was fortunate because I was with a private insurance, and they covered my insulin, and I paid $35 a month in copay. 4 years later, I turned 65 and enrolled in Medicare. My plan paid most of the bill for the first 2 months. Then came the third month. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I went to my pharmacist to pick up the insulin for that third month. And when I arrived there, he said, well, do you know how much this is going to cost? And I said, sure, I was confident. I had paid for it for the first 2 months. Everything was fine. He said, well, it's changed. Do you know what a donut hole is? And I said, other than a bakery, no. And he proceeded to show me the cost. It was $3,000.
Wow.
I was shocked, to say the least. I panicked for a few seconds. Tears strolled down my face, and I thought, what are we going to do about this? My brain was spinning, and I thought, okay, first things first, we got to cancel our vacation. We're going to figure out how we're going to live. We're going to pay for this. And the whole time I was processing this, I was reaching into my purse to grab a credit card. And I'm thinking, how does this happen? I thought I was safe on Medicare. I thought we took care of each other. I handed him the credit card. He completed the transaction, and I quickly made my way out of the pharmacy because I didn't have any Kleenex on me, and my makeup was running down my face. I knew our lives were going to change. The next day, I called the insurance company and I said, what happened? Why $3,000? And they said, we all negotiate our prices, and that's what you have to pay with us as my supplement. So I continue to work so that I can pay for my additional cost, my thousands of dollars that this will cost to keep me going for an entire year. Then came President Biden and the Senate Democrats and the House. I refer to them as my heroes. They fought for us, and even more importantly, they fought for the least of these and provided us with a cap on the cost of insulin. So I will be forever grateful for each one of these. I wish that I could thank them in person, but I hope that my thank you gets to them somehow, some way. I appreciate them. And forgive me, I can still connect to that day in the pharmacy.
It's completely understanding. I don't think anyone can hear that story and not immediately get emotional and put themselves in your shoes and feel the panic that you must have felt at that very moment. So as you mentioned, this bill caps insulin co-pays at $35 a month for folks on Medicare. How will that, change your life besides relieving a big burden off of your shoulders?
Well, as much as I love my job and I love my clients and I love working, I would like to not work so much. And I would love to be able to be relieved of the cost, the high cost of my insulin. And then my husband and I can do a little traveling, and we can see our adult children that live on both sides of the country, and our beautiful, adorable grandchildren, and to be able to travel together, to be able to enjoy our lives after retirement.
Well, that sounds wonderful. And I want to thank you so much for being here with us, Robin, and sharing that story. And I'm sure our folks on our government affairs team can make sure this video gets up to the folks on the Hill so they can hear your thanks. Thank you so much. Mario, if I could turn to you, if you could tell us a little bit about your story.
How you doing? My name is Mario Belonga. I'm the owner and operator of Mario's West Side Market in historic West Las Vegas. As our market, we offer a wide variety of foods and goods to the community. Our neighbor is mostly low-income folks, mostly Black and brown, and we consider by the state to be in the food desert, meaning the folks in our community have limited access to items, nutritious foods that we just take for granted. Fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, and nutritious, food options. My goal in running the market has always been to provide these kinds of foods to members of our community. and many who have to take 2 or 3 buses to get their groceries. I grew up here in West Las Vegas, and I want to serve my community because I care about the people here, most of all, who I know by name. You come into my market and you say, "Hi, Joe. Hi, Mary." I mean, it's where someone said, if you haven't seen somebody in a while, go to Mario's and you'll meet and you'll meet your relatives, because everybody knows each other by name. Over the years, and especially due to the pandemic, we have seen a lot of small businesses close down in our community. Our markets struggled during the pandemic. We lost a lot of employees during that time where they were afraid and worried of getting sick. And so, as same time, we saw many large corporations making historic revenues, you know, and it just seemed it wasn't fair. It seemed like that it was stacked against the little guy. Yet over the past year and a half, I've seen a lot of hopeful about our small business owners, and thanks to the passage of the American Rescue Plan last year, we were awarded an ARPA grant, and with that, we're going to double the size of our market to supply um, nutritious foods and baked goods to our community, to my community, that in the past, they had to travel, like I say, 2 or 3 buses to get to a larger market. Um, the community, and to employ more people as well in the community. I am hopeful that I know that many folks in my community are hopeful that this will bring better life um, saving deals for them. With the American Rescue Plan and now the Inflation Reduction Plan, it seems like we are heading in the right direction and making it easier for small businesses like mine to compete with the big corporations. Um, I want to share a story with you. I had a nephew of mine that had type 1 diabetes, and he couldn't afford his insulin. I'm diabetic also, I'm type 2. I'd share my insulin with him because he couldn't afford to buy his insulin. He passed away of the complications of diabetes about a month ago. It's good to see that now there's hope for the ones that can't afford medication so they can survive and live. It's just tough that it's been where, you didn't have, I was lucky that, I had insurance and even going to buy my insulin, $800. And I didn't buy it for a couple of weeks because I was like, I also have bills to pay. And finally talking to people say, hey, you have to have it or you're just going to get ill, sicker and sicker. And I think we're headed in a good direction by the Biden administration. And, thank God that someone is actually trying to make the playing field level for the small business owners that we have struggled and struggled. And also, now making the big corporations pay their portion of taxes so we can all play the same game on the same field and have a chance. Like I say, during the pandemic, we lost a lot of employees, and the ones we did keep, the big corporations were stealing them away because they could afford to pay, the out, $20 an hour, you know, to the employees, and where us little guys, we couldn't do that. And that's why a lot of the businesses in my community, shut down. It's not that we didn't want to. I mean, I understand, the cost of living is going up and everybody has to live, but you have to make it before you can pay it. And with all the loopholes that these big corporations had, it was easier for them to make it. And the ones that were struggling was the little guys, that was harder for us. So I thank the Biden administration and our Congress people and senators that finally, I'm not saying open their eyes because I'm sure, everybody knows, but finally someone had the courage to go forward and help the communities that are struggling like mine, that we deserve the same thing that, the other communities have, and the same chances as far as, having a place where you can go and buy nutritious food and survive. It's a matter of survival. And I just want to thank them that, it's just great that, that we're heading in the right direction, that I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, as they say, because with this new law, it's going to make it easier for my business and other business, my community to keep going forward.
Well, thank you, Mario. Like Kathy, you answered all of my next question for you. But first, I want to pass along my condolences on the loss of your nephew. I can, only imagine how difficult that was, and for you to share that. So I thank you for sharing that story. And, I look forward to hearing about how you expand and continue to serve your community and hopefully bring them out of being a food desert by being able to expand. So thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
And Pat, if I could turn to you, if you could tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniela. And before I just talk a little bit about some of the things we're doing in Illinois, I just want to say to Kathy and Robin and Mario, I mean, it's hard listening to some of the struggles, but it's incredible seeing like the improvements and the hope that the Inflation Reduction Act and other policies that the Biden administration is putting forward is helping people in their lives. So I'm here on behalf of the Illinois AFL-CIO and a coalition that we formed in Illinois a couple of years ago, Climate Jobs Illinois, made up of the state's labor unions to combat climate change and have labor lead on climate change. Our members represent a wide swath of working men and women at the forefront of fighting climate change, empowering our clean energy future. We represent everyone from wind turbine technicians, solar panel installers, nuclear plant engineers, to security officers, teachers, and janitors. And I'm proud to be here today to share a little bit with you about the critically important work our members are doing on the ground in Illinois, thanks to President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and Illinois' own Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which our coalition helped enact last year in our capital, Springfield, Illinois. Importantly, both measures put working people first. In fact, Illinois' new law, also known by its acronym CEJA, sets forward the most pro-worker, pro-climate, clean energy agenda of any state in the country. Paired with President Biden's ambitious climate plan, Illinois is well positioned to lead the country's transition to zero emissions and set a new pathway for families seeking a foothold in the middle class or looking to ascend within it. In Illinois, CEJA requires project labor agreements or PLAs on all utility scale wind and solar projects, and prevailing wages for all renewable projects other than single family residential. Similarly, the Inflation Reduction Act will require developers to pay workers a prevailing wage in order to qualify for direct pay tax credits. That means workers building our green energy economy will be paid fair wages, work in safe conditions, and have the necessary training to get the job done right. Both measures also expand workforce development efforts to reach people in historically underinvested communities with new pre-apprenticeship opportunities so they can be part also of building our clean energy future. In Illinois, we're expanding workforce hubs and pre-apprenticeship programs statewide to help lift up a new generation of working men and women from communities of color, communities that are also disparately impacted by pollution in the energy generation sector. Importantly, CEJA also provides opportunities for Black and brown contractors to grow into the industry. So not only are we empowering the frontline workers we represent, we're also empowering the owners, the contractors who might otherwise struggle to gain entry into the industry. To understand the real promise of these provisions, I want to tell you a story about Sean Harris. Sean got his start as a union electrician, a member of IBEW Local 134 in Chicago's south suburbs. Eventually, he decided to go out on his own. He started Livewire Electrical Systems out of his basement in 2006, and as he says it, began chasing union work, securing contracts working on schools, hospitals, universities, and utilities like ComEd and telecom providers such as AT&T. Through a lot of sweat, grit, and tears, Sean today is no longer working out of his basement, but operating his 80-employee company in an industrial park in the outskirts of Calumet Park, Illinois, on the south side of Chicago. Like any savvy entrepreneur, Sean looks for where the next big opportunity is. As Illinois began to enact more climate-friendly provisions in the last several years, Sean began looking to expand into the renewable sector, bidding for solar projects, but without much success early on. So committed to his growth strategy, Livewire even hosted a training cohort for one of Illinois' workforce development hubs to deepen their relationship in the industry. Over 20 students from the community came through their facility for the 16-week training to become certified solar technicians. They were mostly Black men, ranging in age anywhere from 21, some of them even into their 50s, some of them returning citizens, and a lot of them looking to reset their lives. Trainees learned the ins and outs of the job and were treated like full-time employees with all the expectations of being a professional, showing up on time, working full work weeks with limited exceptions for time off. Livewire helped host a job fair and matched trainees with mentors and facilitated job placement, including with union shop partners. In the end, every single member of the Livewire cohort earned their certifications and landed a good paying job. Motivated by the experience, Sean and his vice president, Angela Drexel, who's also a 134 member, remained convinced solar was their next opportunity. And that's proved to be true. Livewire now has 2 contracts working on 2-megawatt solar farm developments in Streator and in Peoria, both downstate communities in Illinois. Angela says that while it's taken a lot of patience and diligence, CEJA is what turned it all around for Livewire. Sean and Angela are able to participate in Illinois' next renewable energy credit application process, submitting Livewire as an equity-eligible contractor. Angela says the company foresees the 2023-24 rec year will yield a substantial source of the company's revenue from solar and may allow them to hire even more employees from surrounding communities and communities of color. And the Inflation Reduction Act is only going to amplify that potential, she says. Both the federal and state laws open up opportunities for early entrants, but they also seek to ensure a just transition for workers in incumbent industries, from coal to solar and diesel to electric. The Inflation Reduction Act, for example, provides $2 billion for automakers to convert existing production lines to manufacture clean energy vehicles and $10 billion in investment tax credits to accelerate the development of clean technology manufacturing, including funding for EV manufacturers. While Illinois has secured an early lead in EV manufacturing, having enacted the Reimagining Electric Vehicles Act, or REV Act, which will help us reach our goal of putting 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. Like CEJA, the REV Act is going to provide tax credits for electric vehicle manufacturers, including EV part suppliers, such as battery and charging station manufacturers, as well as tax credits to offset costs to train employees and a diverse set of employees. It's also going to require project labor agreements for contractors seeking tax credits and grant funding to build the facilities that will churn out electric vehicles and build the EV charging network that will be needed to power these vehicles across the state. So I could go on and on about all the different facets about how our state and the federal clean energy policies are going to transform how we live, how we work, and travel. With nearly $400 billion in renewable energy investments in the Inflation Reduction Act, and combined with Illinois' goal to reach zero emissions by 2050, there's certainly a lot of ground to cover. We're talking about massive figures and ambitious plans that are difficult to grasp at this scale. But I'm just going to leave you with one simple takeaway, and it's this. So we are in the fight of our lives with climate change. Daniela talked about the wildfires firefighters are battling out west, and the flooding that we're seeing, not across our country, but across the entire world. It's a daunting challenge, but organized labor and unions have a long history of taking on and winning tough fights for working people and families. We owe it to them and their future generations to get this right. I believe we've done that by coming together in Illinois to enact a pro-worker climate laws, and in Washington, the President Biden and Congress have done with the Inflation Reduction Act. And so those measures, I believe, will ultimately prove what we say regularly in Illinois as it pertains to climate and workers. We don't have to choose between good jobs and building a clean and better future. We can do both. So thank you very much for allowing me to talk a little bit about the work we're doing here in Illinois. And again, thank you to the other panelists for their great stories.
Thank you so much, Pat. Given all the great work that has been going on with CEJA now combined with IRA, what are you most hopeful about?
One of the things, as they talked about with the Inflation Reduction Act, after Governor Pritzker signed CEJA into law last September, one of the main centerpieces in all of the components around CEJA is a discussion around equity. We got about $200 million in programs to help prop up small contractors of color to be able to either enter into the renewable development space. We're going to be spending about $600 million a year in renewable energy credits for wind and solar development. But with the Illinois AFL-CIO and our Climate Jobs Coalition, we've also been able to kind of get ready for the pipeline of workers. We've hired an equity director, and we're having conversations every day with community organizations about partnering with them, writing them into grants with us, and then making sure we prepare them and place them into our apprenticeship programs to where they're not only going to have a job at a renewable energy development, but they're going to have a career in the building and construction trades, and making it even more diverse than it is today. So that's what's really exciting right now, the opportunities and the funding and resources available to improve equity and not only the building construction trades, but in the workforce in general in Illinois.
Well, thank you so much, Pat, for sharing that. And this brings us to the end of our panel. So let me just take a moment to thank all of you, Pat, Mario, Robin, and Kathy, for taking the time. This is what this bill is about, making a difference in the lives of Americans all across the country, reducing costs, making the tax system more equitable, increasing good job opportunities. These are integral components to this law, and they will help transform people's lives and livelihoods. I'm excited to see how this delivers for each of the folks you heard from today, and for millions more as the benefits of this law rev into full gear. Thank you to our audience for joining us, and I hope you join us again for one of our upcoming events in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.